Happy New Year. You know, I made over 20 videos in 2024. Which one do you think got the most views? This one, in which I show Jamie Raines, aka Jammidodger, talking nonsense again. And which video have I received most requests to make over the past few weeks? Another one about Jamie? I didn't realise you loved her so much. She recently made this video called Reacting to the Worst Transphobic Video. I mean, just look at the thumbnail, the lies of the transphobes. Oh, the irony. In this video, Jamie comments with her usual dishonesty on an interview with Helen Joyce by Fraser Myers of Spiked Online. And Jamie surpasses her usual nastiness. She dismisses Helen's well-reasoned and articulate arguments like so.
Putting a bow on top of a turd.
She's inexplicably proud of that turd analogy and uses it 4 times. And as usual, she uses the words transphobe, transphobia, transphobic to excess. These are words that Jamie has done probably more than most to render meaningless. In this video, she says them a total of 49 times. That's nearly once every 2 minutes. Actually, that's probably quite restrained for her. But Jamie's introduction, which is what I'm going to focus on, is about 12 minutes of unadulterated ad hominem, its purpose being to poison the well, to try to discredit Helen before anyone hears a single word she says to Fraser Myers. And as Helen is one of the people I respect most and feel most aligned with in this what do I call it, this resistance movement, I feel kind of obligated to correct the misinformation that Jamie is putting out about her. So in the introduction, Jamie focuses on 3 things about Helen. The first is Helen calling for a reduction in the number of people who transition, which she did in a video on the lovely Helen Staniland's channel back in 2022. And of course, the gender loonies went ballistic about it. I made a video about it actually, and YouTube took it down without telling me why. So I uploaded it to Odyssey, and I also wrote a blog post about it. Links below. Okay, let's go.
I wanted to give a little introduction to her and her history within gender-critical trans fields, if you didn't already know, just so it can provide some context for the video we're about to watch. She's been described as one of the most vocal gender-critical campaigners in the UK, but in all honesty, we can switch out gender-critical campaigner with spreader of transphobic ideology. Transphobe, basically. Anti-trans person.
Which is, of course, what Jamie calls everyone who makes intelligent, evidence-based criticisms of the pernicious and barbaric ideology that Jamie is promoting. So what's new?
She's called for a reduction in the number of trans people. This is literally the video of her saying it.
And
Yes.
in the meantime, while we're trying to get through to the decision makers, we have to try to limit the harm. And that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition. And that's for 2 reasons. One of them is that every one of those people is a person who's been damaged. But the second one is every one of those people is basically, you know, a huge problem to a sane world. Like if you've got people that, and whether they're transitioned, whether they're happily transitioned, whether they're unhappily transitioned, whether they're detransitioned, if you've got people who've dissociated from their sex in some way, every one of those people is someone who needs special accommodation in a sane world where we re-acknowledge the truth of sex. And I mean, the people who've been damaged by it, the children who've been put through this, those people deserve every accommodation we can possibly make. But every one of them is a difficulty.
Okay, Helen has made 2 serious points here. The first is that every person who transitions has been damaged, which is quite a contentious thing to say. And I can't criticise Jamie for failing to engage specifically with what Helen said, because Helen isn't specific about the damage. The other point is that people who have dissociated from their sex need special accommodation. Of course they do. If they demand to be accepted as if they were the opposite sex, if they demand that we disregard the evidence of our eyes and ears, that we change our language to appease their feelings, let them access places and sports and jobs that were intended for the other sex, these things have an impact on other people. In the course of the video, Jamie repeats many of the arguments that I have dealt with in my Awful Arguments by Trans Activist series, including the one saying that not wanting these men in our spaces is just like old-fashioned homophobia and racial segregation. This is from 21 minutes in.
Do you know what was said 20, 30 years ago? Gay women are a danger. Gay women are going to attack straight women. We need segregation. And then do you know what was said before that? Black women. We need to segregate black women from white women. And it is the same story.
Except it isn't, of course, because women can be gay or straight or black or white. They're still women. So-called trans women can be gay or straight, black or white, but they're still men. And that's still a problem. So it's not the same story. It's a very different one. And I wonder where Jamie got that idea that anyone said lesbians are going to attack straight women. I'm well over twice Jamie's age. I grew up in a very homophobic era, and I've never heard anyone say that lesbians are a physical threat to straight women. Not even as a joke have I heard it. So where has it come from? If that was said at all, I don't think it was said very widely, whereas it was quite usual to hear things that suggested no straight man, and especially no young boy, was safe if there was a gay man around. It was really vile. As for black women and white women, of course, racial discrimination wasn't always illegal in this country, and employers could, once upon a time, get away with refusing to hire black people, and landlords could refuse to rent rooms to black people. But racial segregation has never been an official policy or law or practice in this country, and this is something that Jamie does. When it suits her purpose, she will use examples of things that happened in other countries but not in the UK, but she will ignore what happens in those other countries even when they're very pertinent, like the cases of how quickly and how young some kids can get medical interventions, and she will only talk about the UK and the long waiting lists. Sorry, I'm digressing now. This is from 40 minutes in.
You can be a trans woman, you can be a tall woman, you can be a white woman, you can be a black woman, you can be a gay woman, you can be a straight woman, you can be a blonde-haired woman, you can be a brunette woman. Like, there are so many different ways of being, and there's so many different ways of being a woman.
But being a man-woman is not one of those things. To those of us who have stuck with the material reality that there are two sexes and the words we use, like men and boys for males and women and girls for females, words that matter for the purposes of maintaining boundaries and sex-based rights, Jamie's attempts to draw parallels with these completely unrelated things are absurd, trivializing the difference between male and female as if it's like a difference in height or hair color or your sexual orientation, which has no impact on anyone else, except obviously the people you're attracted to and are seeking a sexual connection with. It's bonkers, but Jamie is too personally invested in the falsehood that your so-called gender identity is more important than your sex, that people are born trans.
People are born trans, and when they're referring to girls with transgender identities, they're actually misgendering trans boys.
She is just so convinced of the correctness of her belief that she is incapable of seeing the world through any other lens. And that is why she was so appalled at Helen saying,
We have to try to limit the harm, and that means reducing or keeping down the number of people who transition.
Jamie obviously does not see any harm in so-called transitioning. I suppose she sees it as becoming her authentic self or some such thing. She is in total denial that there could be a better solution for someone who is distressed about their sex than taking cross-sex hormones for the rest of their life and having irreversible surgeries. And maybe for Jamie there wasn't a better solution. Maybe in a previous era in which these medical and surgical interventions weren't possible, she would have spent a lifetime being desperately unhappy about being visibly female. Or maybe she would have done what people had to do and come to terms with it and just got on with things and maybe found happiness anyway. We can't know. She can't know. But while she might see only joy and fulfillment, some of us see adopting a transgender identity and all that entails as more like becoming anorexic or morbidly obese or getting addicted to drugs or alcohol, physically damaging to the person and a problem, a burden for others. And of course we want to reduce the number of people who do that. Jamie has convinced herself that being trans is like being gay. It isn't. And Jamie will spurn any scientific evidence that doesn't affirm what she wants to believe. This bit comes from towards the end of her video.
In terms of the Cass review, the government might be going, but the British Medical Association refused to endorse the findings of Dr. Hilary Cass. It claimed the review contained unsubstantiated recommendations, and its council called on members to publicly critique it. And this was in September this year. There's been a lot of critiques of the Cass review as well. I feel like we should be listening to the medical professionals when it comes to medical treatment.
No, you don't think that, Jamie. You think we should be listening to the medical professionals that you agree with and that we should disregard the rest of them as transphobes. And that is actually the majority. The BMA, the British Medical Association, is a trade union for doctors and medical students. It's not like one of the Royal Colleges, which are the professional bodies for the various medical specialties. I wonder why Jamie is not telling viewers that both the Royal College of General Practitioners and the Royal College of Psychiatrists have said they accept the Cass report and that Dr. Cass's recommendations would inform their future practice, and so did the Association of Clinical Psychologists. Note that Jamie does her usual thing of showing a little snippet of an article, doesn't even say where it's from, let alone provide a link. Want to see the whole thing? Et voila. Quote, "The British Medical Association has threatened the reputation of all UK doctors by rejecting the findings of the landmark Cass review of transgender healthcare," a leading member of the BMA has told The Observer. Dr. Jackie Davis claims that the Doctors' Union stance on the Cass review is irrational, has created a fracture between its leadership and the grassroots doctors it represents, and left the medical profession in an uproar. The BMA is the only medical organisation in Britain to not accept and to find fault with Cass's findings. Doctors on the BMA's ruling council who have dared to challenge its criticism of the Cass review have been subject to abuse, and its decision-making body is now shrouded in a climate of fear and intimidation, Davis claims. Those trans activists say, "The BMA's position has led to around 1,500 doctors, including former heads of medical royal colleges, signing a letter of protest and some long-standing members resigning." Now, this is, of course, just one doctor talking, and personally, I wouldn't use a source that reports just one doctor's views, but this is the report that Jamie chose to use to support what she says She just kept quiet about nearly everything in it. The source that I would use is this one from the New Statesman, which gives far more detail about the original vote and most significantly reports that the BMA has reversed its decision to call for a pause in implementing the recommendations of the Cass review. We also learn that there are 69 voting members on the BMA's Executive Council and only 21 voted to oppose supporting the Cass review. So those 21 medics are the ones Jamie wants you to listen to, not all the other ones. So dishonest. Okay, that was another digression. To return to Jamie's personal attacks on Helen Joyce, the second of the three things she raises is this.
She's also been caught reading erotic fan fiction on a train, something she has admitted to doing.
Caught? She was caught? No, she wasn't. She was seen, spotted, observed by a vile, creepy stalker who, like most people in this iniquitous cult, has no moral compass, who took pictures, including this one, and posted them on social media. Here, Jamie, together with countless other pond life dwelling trans activists at the time, is plumbing new depths, using the word caught to imply that Helen was doing something shameful that she wouldn't want people to know about. If she was doing something shameful that she wouldn't want people to know about, like, what? Reading this stuff because she gets off on it? She'd have been doing it in bed or somewhere private. She wouldn't have been doing it in public, obviously, much less writing articles about it and speaking about it in podcast. And of course, when she writes about this topic, we assume she's read some of it, don't we? We don't think she's writing from a position of willful ignorance, do we?
Apparently, her reason for reading this explicit material was for research purposes and part of work.
Yeah, people sometimes use their time on train journeys to work, Jamie. Guess where I was when I was reading the transcript and making notes on your crappy video? I'd literally just read this bit, so I took some selfies.
I cannot understand or see a reason why it would be necessary for her to read explicit fan fiction in public on a train.
So what if you don't understand it? I don't understand why you want to advertise your wrecked stupidity to the world. Let's move on. The final ad hominem Jamie offers us is this.
She's also literally been discredited by an Australian federal court. UK TERF Helen Joyce discredited by Australian federal court. She is a PhD in mathematics but does not have any formal education or qualifications even in biology, let alone in gender, sex or law. She is not an expert at all.
No, she hasn't literally been discredited by an Australian court. If you're wondering where that headline comes from, because, of course, Jamie's not telling us, it's from this grubby little blog by an Australian trans activist who calls himself Lucy from Narm, and this was in the case of Tickle versus Giggle. For those who don't know about this case, I will try to summarise what I understand of it. I made notes. An Australian woman named Sal Grover created a women-only app she called Giggle, and some bloke who calls himself a woman with the name Roxy Tickle. That name sounds like a pseudonym for a cute and sassy little glamour model, doesn't it? Here he is. Roxy Tickle is in fact accepted as female under Australian law, and his birth certificate has been changed to reflect this fiction. He joined the app and used it for 8 months before he was blocked from using it when a staff member realised he was a man. So Roxy Tickle sued the app, alleging that he had suffered both direct and indirect discrimination on the grounds of his gender identity. He lost on direct discrimination because the judge ruled he had been excluded for being a man, not because he identified as a woman. So he was treated the same as any other man would have been. But Tickle had not claimed discrimination for just being a man. I mean, he couldn't, could he? Because he says he's a woman. He won on indirect discrimination, however, because the condition imposed on Tickle was likely to have the effect of disadvantaging those men who identify as women. Let's never forget we're in clown world these days. Now, there were 3 expert witness reports submitted on Giggle's side, on Sal Grover's side. One from Dr. Colin Wright, evolutionary biologist, one from Dr. Kathleen Stock, philosopher, and one from Dr. Helen Joyce, mathematician, presumably because she wrote a best-selling and very thoroughly researched book on transgender ideology and its effect on others. And she is director of the human rights charity Sex Matters, which, amongst other things, lobbies for clarity on sex in law. She is, by any reasonable measure, an expert on the gender bollocks that gave rise to this case. You don't need a formal educational qualification to be an expert in that nonsense, unless you're providing a report to a federal court in clown world. There are, to be serious, rules set out about who can be expert witnesses. The judge accepted that Colin Wright and Kathleen Stock met the rules, had expert witness status, but he disregarded their reports anyway because, as he explains in the judgment, he had to make a decision according to the law, meaning the law as he interprets it, as it is his privilege to do as a judge, and not according to either biological truths or the philosophical question of whether a woman is a social construct or not. Even if he'd accepted Helen as an expert witness, he would have undoubtedly disregarded her testimony about the effects of gender ideology on women's rights. I think that's what it was about, for the same reason. He had to work with a law that, as it is written, hurts women. Now, this word discredited, it comes up quite a lot with reference to witnesses giving testimony in court. Lawyers will often do their best to discredit them, to plant the idea that they are not to be trusted. This did not happen to Helen Joyce. I'll just show Jamie reading a bit more of that blog.
The Australian Federal Court called into question the expertise of UK-based TERF activist Helen Joyce in a significant judgment handed down on Friday. Joyce, a prominent figure in the UK anti-transgender movement and enjoyer of Harry Potter erotic fanfiction.
There you go. Not content with lying about Helen being discredited, he lies about her enjoying pornographic fiction aimed at teens and young adults. If the word discredited is to apply to anyone, it should be to the man who wrote this disgusting piece, and to Jamie Raines for repeating it as if it's got any kind of authority. Absolutely despicable. You know, when I started watching Jamie's video, my first thought was that I would skip the first minute or so because it's just Jamie talking utter crap. But having seen that that's all Jamie does in this video, I changed my mind. Jamie has no arguments, she has no evidence, she provides no sources. All she has amounts to this.
Who would you listen to when it comes to trans topics? A mathematician who was literally ruled by a federal court as not being an expert at all on gender or trans topics and was caught reading explicit fiction in public? Or someone who is an actual trans person and has a PhD in transgender development and well-being?
You've got a degree in baloney.
Your choice.
Yeah, who would you rather listen to? Someone who has, from a position of objectivity, immersed herself in a subject, carried out extensive research, analysed its effects, and written about it with honesty and clarity in a serious and scholarly work? Or somebody whose only authority comes from their own subjective feelings, their innate and emotive connection to masculinity and rejection of femininity, and who, rather than engaging with evidence-based arguments, resorts to smears and falsehoods, and who has produced a grooming manual? Oh, if anyone's tempted to scold me for buying Jamie's book, I got it from Bookish, which is one of the country's largest second-hand bookstores, and I was intrigued at the pristine condition it was in for a second-hand book, like it had barely been thumbed. But whatever the condition, as Jamie says, you can't put a bow on a turd and expect people not to notice that it's a turd. And by the way, this is what it looks like to be caught reading shit on a train. Bye for now.